"We want a child from you tonight." 4 virgin women in the abandoned farm he bid $15 for. The auctioneer's voice was half gone from the cold and the whiskey he'd been nipping since morning, and when he called the Harlan parcel, $15, I raised my hand before I'd properly thought it through. That was my habit then, move first, think walking away. The place was a ruin, anyone could see that. 3 years empty since old Ezra Harlan died and his sons scattered. The fence line on the north was down in 4 places. The well casing had heaved in the last hard freeze. The barn roof had a gap you could see sky through, and the smell coming off the place, rot and mousework and something sour I couldn't name, hit you before you cleared the gate. I'd bought it to graze the south pasture through summer, cheap graze land. That was all I wanted out of it. I rode out the following morning to walk the fence line and start a count of what the repair work would cost me. I heard them before I saw them. A woman's voice, low, talking to someone, and then a sound I hadn't heard in years. A laugh, young and real and a little too bright, the kind that's trying to cover something. I came around the corner of the house with my hand on my belt out of reflex, and 4 women were standing in the yard looking at me the way you look at a wolf that's wandered out of the tree line. I stopped. The one who'd laughed was maybe 22, 23, dark red hair pinned hard against the wind, a gray dress that had been washed so many times it had gone the color of dishwater. She had flour on her hands. They were making something. Bread, maybe, over a fire they'd built in the yard because the cook stove in the house had a cracked firebox and they'd known better than to use it. The one who spoke first was older, 27, maybe 28. Brown hair, dark eyes set close, and the kind of still face that means a person has already decided several things and is waiting to see if you'll give her a reason to change them. "You the new owner?" she said, not a question. "Elias Cord," I said. "Yes, ma'am." "Ruth Haverford," she didn't offer her hand. "These are my sisters." Clara, the redhead, who nodded. June, a smaller girl, maybe 18, standing near the door with her arms crossed over her chest, thin and watchful, large eyes. And Della. The 4th one came out of the house doorway then, wiping her hands on a cloth. She was the youngest by the look of her. 16, maybe, big-boned and quiet. I looked at the 4 of them. "What are you doing on my property?" I asked, and I said it even enough because there was nothing to be gained by starting off ugly. "Living on it," Ruth said. That was the short answer. The long one took a while. Their father had worked the Harlan place as a tenant hand for 11 years before Ezra died. When the property went to the bank and then sat idle, there was nowhere for the family to go. Their mother had died the winter before. Their father, and this she said without flinching, had walked east in March and hadn't come back, and she did not say it with grief, so I didn't offer any. They had food enough for another 3 weeks if they stretched it. They had nowhere to go and no money to get there with if they had. That was the situation. I stood in that yard for a long time, looking at the gap in the barn roof and the heaved well casing and the 4 of them looking back at me. And I did the calculation I'd been doing my whole life. What needs doing, and who's going to do it? "I'm going to need the house," I said finally. "We know," Ruth said. She didn't blink. "I'll give you a month. While I work the fence line, I'll sleep in the barn." She looked at me for a moment. "Then that's fair." I got my bedroll from the saddlebag and set up in the barn that night. The gap in the roof wasn't over the stall I chose, which was about the best I could say for it. The cold came in around midnight, and I lay there listening to the wind working at the siding and thought about what the hell I'd gotten myself into. I was 51 years old. I'd had a wife once, Nora, a good woman, buried 7 years now outside of Laramie, and after her I'd gone into the kind of quiet that settles on a man when he stops expecting company. I didn't drink much. I worked. I'd built up a decent spread south of the parcel, about 400 acres of decent grass and a stone and timber house I'd raised with my own hands over 3 winters. I didn't need anything from the Harlan place except the grays. But there were 4 women in the house and a well casing that needed pulling, and that was just the truth of where I'd arrived. I started on the well casing the next morning. It's the kind of work that requires 2, but I've done it alone before. You rig a tripod, use a block and tackle, and take your time. June came out mid-morning without being asked and held the line while I worked the casing free. She didn't talk much. Neither did I when it was done. She went back inside without ceremony, and that suited me. Clara brought me a plate of corn, bread, and beans at noon and set it on the fence post near me and said, "It's not much." I said it was plenty, and it was. She lingered a minute the way young women do when they're deciding whether to say the next thing. Then she said, "Ruth told us you were probably going to be trouble. She thought any man who'd buy this place that fast was cutting some kind of corner." I looked at her. "She changed her mind?" I asked. Clara smiled, quick, a little sharp. "She hasn't said she was wrong yet, but she will eventually." She picked up the empty plate and went back to the house. The fence line took me the better part of a week, working early and late. The fourth day, Della appeared in the north field with a bucket of water and walked it out to where I was working without being told. She was shy about it, set the bucket down, and was turning to go before I'd even said thank you. I said it anyway. She stopped and half-turned. She had her father's look, I guessed, big-boned and careful, doing the right thing and not making a production of it. "That's kind," I said. She shrugged one shoulder in a way that meant she wasn't sure of the word, and went back. Evenings I sat in the barn and thought about what to do. The smart move was obvious. Finish the fence work, give them the month I'd promised, and let them figure the rest. That was the deal I'd offered and the deal she'd accepted. But there was the well, and the firebox, and the gap in the roof, and the fact that 3 weeks of food would run out before the month did. I didn't pretend to myself that I was doing it for sentimental reasons. I just don't see a problem and leave it. I rode to town on the Friday and came back with a new firebox liner, 100 weight of flour, salt pork, cornmeal, coffee, and a bag of nails. I offloaded it at the house door and Ruth came out and stood on the step watching me. "That's not part of the month," she said. "No," I agreed. "What do you want for it?" I looked at her. The question was plain, and so was the fact that she was ready for a plain answer, whatever it was. "I want the fence posts reset on the south side when I get to them," I said. "There's 4 of you. That's a half-day's work with the right help." She held my gaze for a moment. "We can do that," she said. So that became the arrangement, not spoken out plain, just understood. I worked the place. They helped when I needed hands. I kept the pantry filled. Nobody made anything complicated out of it. There's a thing that happens sometimes when you're working hard alongside people, where you stop seeing them as a situation and start seeing them as themselves. Took me about 2 weeks. June was the smart one. She read everything she could get her hands on. I'd brought a newspaper from town wrapped around the salt pork, and she'd smoothed it out and read it twice through before supper. She asked me one evening, without looking up, what I thought about the railroad buying up the land east of Roscar Creek. I told her what I'd heard. She told me what she thought. She was 18 years old and sharper than 3/4 of the men I'd ever done business with. Della was the worker. No talking about it, no complaining. She just did. You'd see her carrying water before dawn and mending fence wire by lamplight and never asking for credit or acknowledgement. The kind of person who holds a thing together without ever saying so. Clara I liked for different reasons. She had a frankness that I'd have found irritating in a lesser person, but in her it was just honest. She laughed at things. Not foolish laughing, but the kind that means a person is still interested in being alive despite everything, which is worth something. Ruth I understood last of all, and I think that was because she'd been running things for long enough that she didn't let anyone see the edges of her very easily. What I saw first was the back of her. She was always moving, checking on something, carrying something, fixing something. She was the one who'd made the decision to stay after her father left, and that meant she'd taken on everything that decision cost. If the food ran short, she was the one who felt it first because she ate last. If there was trouble coming, she was the one scanning the road for it. She'd been carrying this for months before I showed up, alone, without complaint, without anyone to tell her good job or to notice the weight of it. I noticed it about 10 days in. The morning started ordinary. I was repairing the firebox in the kitchen, awkward work, lying half inside a cold stove with your face in the soot, and Ruth was working at the table behind me, quiet and steady. We'd been in the same room for an hour without talking, which is a particular kind of ease you don't get with most people. Then I heard her breath catch. Not a sob, just a small break in the rhythm, the sound a person makes when they've been holding something for a long time and their arms give out just for a second. I stayed still. I didn't say anything because I knew enough to know when a person needs not to be seen for a moment. But when I pulled myself out of the stove and she turned, her eyes were dry, her face was composed. She'd already put it back wherever she kept it. I looked at her straight for a beat longer than usual, and she looked back. "You're doing well by them?" I said, meaning her sisters. Something moved across her face. She looked back down at the table and her jaw worked for a moment. "Wasn't much of a choice," she said. "There's always a choice," I said. She didn't answer that. But her hands, which had been moving steadily at the dough, went still. We didn't say anything else for a while, but something had been said. The month ran out on a Thursday. I was in the north field when Ruth came out to find me. She walked all the way out there, half a mile, and she had something in her hand. I watched her come across the field with the wind pulling at her hair, and her jaw set the way it always was, and I thought, there it is. She stopped a few feet off and held out the paper. It was a letter she'd written to a cousin in Colorado. There was work there, she said, a boarding house that needed a cook. "All four of us?" I asked. "All four." I took off my hat and looked down at it, an old hat. I'd had it so long I didn't think about it anymore. "That's what you want," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What I want and what makes sense aren't the same thing right now." I looked up. She was looking at me the way she'd looked at me through every day of the past month, steady, weighing, deciding. But something was different in it now, and we both knew it. "The place needs work," I said. "Another month of it minimum, roof's not done. The tack room floor is half rotten. I could use hands." "You could hire hands," she said. "I could," I agreed. "They wouldn't know the work." She stood there in the wind. Her coat had a button missing on the second eyelet, and she'd replaced it with a piece of wrapped wire, and that wire was catching the light. "What are you saying, Ilias?" she said, not asking me to say it plain. So I said it plain. "I'm saying the place runs better with you in it. I'm saying I've been sitting in that barn for a month, and it occurred to me a week ago that I don't want to stop. I'm saying you're the most capable person I've been around in a long time, and I don't throw that word at people, and if you've got a reason to go, I won't hold you. But if the only reason you're going is because the month is up, I'd like you to stay." She looked at me for a long moment. "All four of us," she said. "All four of you," I said. Something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly. She wasn't a soft-faced woman, and I wouldn't have wanted her to be. But the held thing in her, the constant bracing, eased a fraction. Like a rope that's been pulled tight for so long that, when you let it off the tension, you can see the fibers uncurl. "Clara's going to have opinions," she said. "I noticed that," I said. She almost smiled, almost. "Let me talk to them," she said. They stayed. I won't make more of the spring than it was. It was work, most of it. The roof got done in 3 weeks, which required all of us, and I spent 2 of those days higher up than I'm entirely comfortable with anymore, and I didn't say so, and none of them mentioned it, for which I was grateful. June bartered her reading for a set of better tools from the hardware in town. She talked the man into it, don't ask me how. Della recaulked every window in the house. Clara kept a running argument going with me about where the kitchen garden should be, and she was right, and after a week I moved it. Ruth ran everything. She didn't run it over me. She wasn't that kind of woman, and I wasn't that kind of man. But she had a sense for what needed doing and in what order, and she didn't waste motion, and she'd worked with enough difficult situations that she had a patience with problems I'd never quite developed. I'd come in at the end of a long day and find that the thing I'd been worried about had been handled quietly while I was working something else. She never said, "Look what I did." She just did it. One evening in late April, I came in from the field later than I'd meant to a heifer with a stuck calf, a long hour of it, and I was tired clear down to the bone, hands still rough from the work. The kitchen was lit and warm, and there was food on the stove, and June and Della were at the table, Della already asleep over her folded arms, June reading by the lamp. Clara was somewhere. Ruth was at the window. She turned when I came in and looked at my hands. "Go wash," she said. I went and washed. When I came back to the table, she put a plate in front of me and sat across from me and poured coffee for us both, and didn't ask how it had gone because she could read how it had gone. That was it, that was all. But I sat in that kitchen with the lamp burning and the sleeping girl and the quiet and the coffee and the woman across from me, and I thought, this is what the thing was supposed to feel like. All those years. This. It was June who asked me about the child. "I'm going to tell it plain and let you sit with it." We were fixing the tack room together. She was holding boards while I nailed, and she said, without any particular lead-up, "Ruth wants children. She always has. She never said so because there wasn't anyone to say it to." I kept nailing. "Why are you telling me that?" I said. Because you need to know it, she said, and she won't tell you herself. A pause. She's 28, she's not going to say it, but she wants it. I drove the last nail. I didn't say anything else to June about it, but I thought about it. I thought about it for 3 days. What I knew about Ruth by then, she worked without complaint. She was honest when she could have been easy. She'd held 4 lives together through a hard winter on almost nothing. She was direct and clear-eyed and proud in the way a person is proud when they've earned it. She was 30 years younger than I'd started out to be when I bid on this ruin, and she was 10 times better suited to a hard life than anyone I'd met in the last decade. And she looked at me sometimes across the table or across a field with a look that I'd been pretending not to see. I thought about it for 3 days, and then I went and found her in the barn at evening, hanging harness. "Ruth," I said. "Elias," she said, not looking up. "I'm going to say something, and I want you to hear it straight." She set down the harness and turned. Her face was level. "I'm 51, I said. "This place is a repair job that's going to be a real thing in another year if we keep after it. I've got the South spread. I've got a house that's been empty of anyone I was glad to see for 7 years. I don't have pretty words. I've never had them." A breath. "But I'd like you to stay, not the month, not until you've figured something else. I mean for good. I mean as my wife, if that's something you'd consider." She was quiet for a moment, just a moment. "Are you asking me," she said, "or are you telling me what you think is practical?" "Asking," I said. She looked at me for a long time. And then something happened that I don't think she'd let happen in front of anyone in a long while. Her eyes went bright. She blinked it back and straightened and set her jaw, but it had been there, just for a second, the way a person looks when they've been carrying a weight for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down, and they're suddenly surprised by how their arms feel. She stepped across the space between us and put her hand flat against my chest, right over where the shirt buttons were, and looked up at me. Her hand was warm even through the cloth, not reaching up or clinging, just there, sure. "Yes," she said. That was it, that was all of it. I put my hand over hers, and we stood like that for a moment in the barn with the horses moving in the quiet behind us, and the evening light coming low through the boards. We were married in May by the circuit preacher in the kitchen, with Clara crying and not admitting it, and June reading something she'd prepared, and Della standing in the corner looking pleased in her quiet way. Ruth wore a dress she'd made from cloth I'd brought from town, dark blue, simply cut, and she looked at me during the words with that steady, level look that by then I knew was how she showed everything she felt. I won't tell you the spring was easy after that. It wasn't. The work was hard and the money was tight, and we'd have a long way to go before the place was what it could be. Clara found a schoolteacher's post in the fall and went to take it, and June made it clear she intended to make something of herself, which I believed completely. Della stayed. She was a natural with the animals and the land, and she found her footing on the place the way people do when the land is the right shape for them. But what I'll tell you is this. That winter, the first winter with Ruth in the house, the first winter I hadn't been alone in 7 years, I'd wake sometimes in the dark and lie still and feel the weight of her sleeping beside me, and the house quiet around us, and the cold outside where it belonged, and something in me that had been pulled tight for a long, long time would just let off. Not because things were fixed, they weren't. The south pasture needed reseeding, and the roof had held but barely, and there was always something. But I'd wanted to be needed for a long time and hadn't known it until I was. I'd wanted to be seen for what I was, not young anymore, not easy, not the kind of man who makes anything look graceful, just capable, just steady, just mine. And she saw it. She'd seen it from the beginning, from that first morning in the yard when she'd measured me and made her call, and every day since she'd acted on it, which is more than most people give you. I bid $15 for a ruin, and got more than I deserved out of it. You don't argue with a thing like that. You just take off your hat and go to work.